the argument I was advancing there, that people who think this South African or sub-Saharan African telco market has gone to sleep and that it can only be held by pension funds. Give us an update on that, because we've been debating that for about 3 years. What's your view?
Yeah, I think in a short sense, there's certain markets in the region that are more mature than others. So South Africa is pretty mature
in terms of the number of potential subscribers.
I mean, pretty much everyone who wants a cell phone's got a cell phone.
Except the 12-year-olds, but I guess it's a chain.
It's around about 110% SIM card penetration,
right?
Which shows you that the growth in South Africa in terms of number of subscribers isn't that much. So what the operators have to do now is see how else can they generate money from the subscribers, and that's where we're seeing this big growth in data. In other markets like Nigeria and some of the other markets in Africa, there's still quite a lot more growth to go, at least for the next two or so years.
Okay, because just for the non-specialists, clearly, I mean, what's attractive about the voice business is that it's massively profitable. Sure. People love to talk to each other, and even people that have relatively little disposable income are often very happy to use it in that fashion. And the margins are good. Why? Because it's such a valued service. In the data environment, the margins are tighter and it's more competitive, or is it more a matter that class of consumer is just a little bit more sophisticated and will pick and choose between different services? Why is the one much more profitable than the other?
I think it's a bit of both, the sophistication of the consumers, but also I think data's more competitive because there are more people providing data and there are more mechanisms that you can get data on. Whereas voice, there's pretty much 2 or 3 key operators.
Okay, so people can get an ADSL line and or 3G and or a WiMAX connection, so you can't rip it out. You've got to be relatively modest.
But, Paul, I think what's critical as we move into a more mature market, especially in South Africa, what you will see is that there'll be pressure to bring down the prices on that voice, coming from lots of different angles, competitive angles, as well as the regulator.
Right, we've seen that in South Africa.
And so and they've already suggested that the guys reduce their interconnect rates, which hopefully will lead to reduced retail tariffs for you and I to pay less. And as we pay less, if we don't talk more, the operators are going to lose out a little bit. And what they're hoping to make that up on is data. The only problem is that the operators are currently charging us quite a high per minute rate, R2 a minute, R1.50 a minute, depending on your package. But if you had to speak on a voice over IP type of technology, and we won't get into the technicals of that, you could pretty much be charged between 5 and 20 cents per minute for the data equivalent of that voice call.
Right.
So over the next 5 to 10 years, I think what will happen is the billing methodologies of these operators will get very severely challenged, and it's potentially going to be negative.
Okay, so without, as you say, going into the technicalities, what you're concerned about is if someone's got a smartphone and they're clever enough to put a Skype application on it, they could end up talking to their mates at a fraction of what they would have paid for a voice call, depending on the current tariffs.
Sure.
But isn't it also a question of the networks over time working out what kind of thing you're doing with the phone, what kind of connection you're making, and charging you accordingly? Because if you want to watch Netflix videos on your 3G connection, that's fine, but you've got to be potentially charged more for that than someone who's just doing a quick check on the weather.
Sure, I think where it should go in future is that there shouldn't be any discrimination as to what you're trying to do on your data. Provided it's legal, I think you should be charged based on how much data you're using. And a voice call uses remarkably very little data. So I see in future, maybe not now because the handsets that can do these types of things is constrained to a very small portion of users, and the number of people who would know how to do that now is very small anyway.
Infinitesimal currently.
So now it's, but I think the pressure's there, and if you look all over the world, it's definitely coming.
Okay. Now this thing about technology and how quickly it changes. I mean, 5 years ago, I don't think people would have conceived of just what the handsets could do. And accordingly, people didn't conceive of people having even like social media, doing Facebook and Twitter online on their cell phones, which is now apparently one of the largest sort of users of time online. So is it not true also to say that in 5 years hence, we assume everyone's got a high-speed data connection. We assume that it's like the new 4G, LTE type technologies. And therefore, the opportunity for people to do stuff online, which they used to perhaps not do online, becomes even greater. And therefore, the data business becomes a much bigger business, or not necessarily the data business, but for the networks that have got the customers, that have got the billing relationships and all that, it's potentially a much more attractive business to be in. And I mean, that's my thesis, but I'm not suggesting necessarily that everybody believes it. If you look at the valuations of these companies, they don't look like they're discounting enormous increases in revenue.
Sure. No, I think you're right. I think we're very mature and potentially gone ex-growth, or have gone ex-growth in voice. 4% sort of revenue growth recently reported by Vodacom in the voice side, which is pretty much ex-growth. The data's growing tremendously, but once again, that's data for data's sake, just
and
selling
a relatively small base.
Selling megabits and megabytes, etc. Where I think the operators should focus on for the next 5 to 10 years is exactly what you're saying. They've got the unique position of having a device in millions of people's pockets that those people won't even go to sleep without switching them off these days. And especially in South Africa, you have to have your cell phone. So I think they need to look at the applications in the future. I'm not sure that they are best positioned to be the people that will make all the money from these future applications. But as you said, we don't know what will happen in 5 years' time. But I think it's that area of providing value, applications. It's what you're doing on that phone that counts. And I think if the operators can gear themselves up for that, they potentially could find the next growth wave.
Yes.
But bear in mind that as the voice business declines, because it's now pretty much flat, as it starts declining, it's so big that to compensate that for that decline with any other little application, it's going to have to really be big. We haven't seen what that is yet. So I think I can understand why the market's taking that view.
Yes, okay. So, I mean, but in some senses for investors that are very positive about this technology and about this space, that creates an opportunity because not everybody is a true believer.
Sure.
Speaking of true believers, I mean, there were many that felt that Vodacom, because of its big base here, was the most mature and therefore it had the least growth potential, but somehow its share price went from 50 to 80. Now, why is that briefly? And then just quickly run us through your current views with regard to MTN and Telkom.
No, look, I mean, Vodacom has performed in a mature market. Bear in mind, South Africa is pretty much 90 to 95% of the business. It's performed in a mature market exceptionally well. So they've kept their costs in line. They've done all the things they need to do to eke out the growth that they've eked out. However, as I said earlier, voice revenue growth of low single digits isn't anything to get too excited about. And the data growth, while it's big, there's huge pressure on pricing there. So it's going to have to grow, in volume terms tremendously to overcome the voice stagnation. Voice will probably go flat next year and then start going in decline. So I think Vodacom is not a great growth story. Why has the share price gone up? I think it's a solid company, increased its dividend quite a lot. I think people are attracted to that. So for the next 2-3 years, I don't see massive share price appreciation. I think you're going to get a good dividend and it's pretty low risk and stable company.
And MTN?
MTN, I think, while they are exposed to South Africa is a very small portion, well, not very small, it's probably around about a third of the group, and they're still exposed to much higher growing markets in Nigeria and Iran. So I think for the next year or two, in a case of MTN, you've got quite a bit more growth potential, with a little bit more risk, because there's risks in terms of regulatory, there's currency issues, etc. So it's really your investment profile. If you want a little bit more risk, you could potentially get a little bit more capital appreciation out of it.
And then what about our friends at Telkom?
Well, I mean, Telkom's announced a new CEO, and we are still waiting to see what they're going to do with a couple of other issues that we think they have in the business before we can sort of make a proper view of them going forward.
With ATA? Because I remember you were wondering whether they'd be able to get the traction that you thought they could get?
I think it's still too early. You know, we've got to give them at least a year and see what the numbers are saying. You know, they're still busy getting everything sorted out from the distribution side to the products, and I think it's taking on. I think it's going okay. I wouldn't say it's terrible from what I'm hearing in the industry, but it's still too early. We need actual numbers, and we need to see.
So not a roaring buy at these levels. I think it's in the high 30s at the moment.
You know, Paul, the argument on Telkom is that it's undervalued, and you're buying a company that's potentially worth a bit more because it's just been hit hard. But
its market position and its assets, but.
At this point, until we know what management are going to do with their strategy,
how does it get that mojo back? Yeah.
How does it get their mojo back? Until they tell us how they intend doing that, it's hard to just buy Telkom and leave your money there for the next 2-3 years because you're never quite sure what's going to happen. So yes, there may be a little bit of value, but I don't think it's something you can buy for the longer term right now.